In 1993, when Sheilah and I were at the March on Washington with Bert, with Michael, same person, he had just tested positive a few months earlier. So I'm remembering now seeing all these dead folks memorialized in quilts and thinking, is Bert going to be one of these people? Like, hell no. Like, we're going to keep him alive, and this is not happening, and there won't be a need to do a quilt. And then he ended up, years later, becoming ill and dying in 2001.
I never thought I'd create a panel for Michael because it felt like it would make it more real. I think it might have crossed my mind, but I could never have brought it to fruition. I think it's an overwhelming process. And I don't know how John was able to do it. I'm grateful that he was. But I couldn't do it. He was B. Michael Hunter as a writer, world traveler.
He was my lover. He was my domestic partner later on. He was a co-organizer. He was really intelligent and beautiful and compassionate and cared about family chosen and family of origin.
I wouldn't have finished college if it weren't for him. He had me come and live with him in Massachusetts so that I could finish school. He was a really good friend. He was. I was his favorite.
It's true. You were his favorite cousin.
And he was my favorite. I feel his presence. So he's like a spirit guide to me. I just wish he didn't die. Just wish he didn't die. And he left me John.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Bert died in 2001, January 23rd. Then in 2003, I remember grabbing my journal and starting to sketch out, if there was a panel, a quilt, what would it look like? And he was a teacher of young people, and he loved maps. He loved atlases. So it's like, well, it's got to be a teaching thing. What if the quilt was a map, a world map? And then we started to drop his ashes in different places because he loved traveling. So it was a way to honor maybe some of the places that he had visited before or the places he didn't yet get to. And that kind of watered the idea of, how do we document where he's been? How do we document where his ashes are? How do we document where he lived? You can do that with a map. And so I started talking to Sheilah and other people about the quilt and how, because Bert was so community oriented, how to involve a whole lot of people in this process. His favorite color was teal, like on the blue-green spectrum. And a world map really lends itself to a lot of blue-green. So the idea of inviting people to contribute a swatch, a piece of cloth that was blue, green, teal, and put the word out and see, who responded. And I know that Sheilah followed up with lots of people. It's like, hey, what about that quilt swatch for Michael's quilt? And in the end, we got over 100, actually 108 pieces of cloth from 6 different countries. And then it was like, now what? I'm going to take a class in quilt making. I knew nothing about quilting. I did know it was a collective process. And the idea came, need partners. We need partners to work on this quilt. And maybe there's someone out there who would want to do it with me, with us. And I remember Googling African American quilt living in the East Bay of San Francisco. And there was one hit, Cherry Mae Golston, who's an artist who also quilted. And I reached out cold, and she replied yes. And from that point on, many months of working on a project together, but really connecting as human beings, heart to heart. And I started to get that, this is what quilting is. It's a communal process. You get to learn about each other. You get to share each other's losses, share each other's hopes, and materialize something really beautiful at the same time. But the manifestation of the quilt is pretty much all Cherry Mae, and so many of the 108 people who contributed pieces, some of them, a number of them are gone now. They've died too. So Bert's quilt, it was about Bert and about who he impacted and all the lives he touched. But even the people who contributed, there's a piece of them in the actual quilt, which I didn't realize until this weekend. And knowing that the spirits of so many people are together through Bert.
This whole process too, like Michael left his writings and stuff to John and I, but John has been the person going through all of the writing, all of his belongings and archiving things. So I also imagine that all of that he has gone through is in the quilt, even if we don't see it. It was very therapeutic because, the making of the quilt helps the grief process, and the making of the quilt and the collaboration around it and the love and the sadness and the whole stuff that went into it is in the quilt. The quilt is therapeutic, even if your hand never stitched it. So.
When we delivered the quilt, kind of like the river joining the ocean of the other quilts, I thought I was going to feel like clutching it, like, no, don't take it. But I think because I knew it was ready. It was ready to go. I was ready. One thing that happened was that I anticipated feeling Bert's loss again after giving the quilt up. And so I actually asked Cherry Mae, the artist who sewed the quilt, can we make a second quilt so that I can have it? So call it crafty, call it not being able to let go. But I was like, how could I give up this quilt after living with it for so many years? And that it has so many people and emotions in it. So I was kind of guarding against that by making sure I had a spare.
Handing over the quilt after so much love went into it was hard, but it was made easier by documenting the process. And finding out that John had another quilt also is helpful to the process, but it's just more like sharing him. I just don't want it to get lost, There's so many of them. I just don't want it to get lost. But also seeing yesterday how fast community wraps them up and puts them back helped me a little bit. But yeah.
Giving up the quilt to the folks, Gert and Roddy at the National AIDS Memorial, at the quilt, I also felt the care that everybody else's quilt had experienced. So it was like, as a parent, leaving your child with someone who you trust, I felt fine. I wasn't going to worry. And that helped a lot.